Today's guest is award-winning coach and author Claire Cahill. Now, Claire is an executive leadership coach, and she also won the Executive Coach of the Year award in 2014. She's also one of our coach trainers on the Corporate and Executive Diploma here at the Coaching Academy, and is the founder of Ascendo Coaching. And she works with business leaders to unlock potential for leadership success. But it's much more than that. And if you've attended any of Claire's training, you will know that she really is a powerhouse in this particular area on so many levels. So let's go straight in and welcome, Claire. So lovely to see you. I'm looking forward to diving into this topic with you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me as your guest today.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're really welcome. Look, let's rewind because, as you know, I am passionate about people's stories. I think it's stories that really, sort of speak so loudly about the people that we are. So would you mind just sort of telling us a little bit about your journey to become a coach, from your days in the corporate sector to what led you to launch your very successful business and brand, Ascendo Coaching?
So I had my own confidence crisis, which is bizarre then that I market myself as a confidence and leadership coach, because I returned to work after the birth of my second son, Henry, in 2011. So he was born October 2010, and I had 6 months off of work on maternity leave. I returned after 6 months because financially, I didn't feel that I had a choice. And certainly emotionally, I wasn't ready. Now, at the point of going on maternity leave, I'd got a new female boss that I'd built a relationship in 4 weeks. So the reality is I'd not built a relationship with her. Took 6 months off, and she had 6 months to build that relationship with all of the other team managers. So when I returned, her view, rightly or wrongly, was you've only had 6 months out of the business. You should just be able to slot back in where you left off. Oh, how wrong was she? Because I used to fake it till I made it. I'd put my makeup on in the morning. I'd put my dress on. I'd trot into the contact centre. Whereas inside, I was crumbling and I was just dying because I just thought I don't have the ability to do this leadership role. I'd lost who I was. I was Claire Cahill, a wife, a mother, a sister, a daughter, a leader, but I just did not feel that I had my place. So after 10 weeks of faking it till I made it, I did something that I'd never done in my 20-year career. And that was I went off on long-term sick with work-related stress and had 12 weeks to rediscover who I was. And thankfully, that's when I came across the Coaching Academy, when I started to journal every day and realise what is it that I absolutely need, because I didn't need counselling, I didn't need cognitive behaviour therapy because I'd got this great self-awareness. But what I actually needed was a coach to take me from the place that I was now to the place that I wanted to be. So after spending 2 days with the fabulous coaches at the Coaching Academy, in the words of my husband, I've got my wife back. She's got the sparkle in her eyes and she's confident again. And I returned to work, and I then embarked on my coaching journey with the Coaching Academy and used that as an opportunity to become a qualified coach, used my role in the financial organisation to coach my ideal clients to get my diploma. And it was once I'd got my personal and performance diploma that I then set up my business and ran my business alongside my employed role until 5 years ago. I did what I encourage my clients to do and sack the boss and become our own boss. So I sacked the boss, set up my business, and then 12 months later, COVID happened and I was homeschooling as well as running a business, as well as living with my ideal client, who was my busy, stressed out husband in that hamster wheel, struggling to get out of it. But I learned so much from that experience, and I wouldn't change a single thing, because I am where I am now. Went knocking on the door of the Coaching Academy and said to Sharon, I would really love to be a trainer and come back to where it all started and inspire this next generation of coaches. And the door was open. So thank you very much, Sharon, because I'm here now to tell my story.
Oh, bless you. Well, a couple of times our paths crossed, didn't they? Before you joined us as a trainer, and you spent a long time building your business, and within that time, Claire, you also wrote a book,
I
which
did.
Bev James endorsed for you. Tell us a little bit about the book that you wrote.
So my book was Empowering Employee Engagement, How to Ignite Your Team for Peak Performance. And it's funny how the world works, because the female boss that didn't encourage me and support me to return from maternity leave went off on maternity leave and returned to a female boss and was managed out of the business. But she was replaced with a female boss who gave me this fabulous opportunity to play to my coaching strengths, because she realized that she'd got a qualified coach in a team. And how many of the leaders that you know are expected to be coaches as well, but probably don't know how to coach. So she tapped into that strength, and she gave me a fabulous opportunity to take a team of disengaged employees on their own journey of self-discovery. So I worked with them every single day for 12 weeks, took them all on their own individual journey, and that gave me all of the content to write my book. And I share their stories in the back of my book, but to protect their confidentiality, I've changed their names. And so, yeah, that was how I became a published author, alongside running a business and being a mum and being a wife, because as you know, Sharon, I don't do things by halves. I go all in everything that I'm doing.
You certainly do, and that's your superpower, Claire, as you well know. 100%, all in, 100%. And what I really love about that is, you've used your personal experience, which has resonated with a number of people here today, and they've popped that into the chat box. Your personal story, you've used that and you've turned it around for it to work for you. And it's almost like you had that coaching mindset before you had your coach training. You were starting to reframe and know that things needed to change and you needed to look at life through a different lens. And I love that you were also able, before you set up Ascendo Coaching, able to use your qualification within the workplace, and coach those leaders, which obviously gave you some material for your book, but equally, being able to coach those leaders in a way that they deserve to be coached, because there are lots of people who are coaching or say they're coaching, but actually it's more like mentoring. So we know the power of the true coaching and the difference that really makes.
And I think what I noticed, Sharon, was in organizations, so many times leaders transition into those leadership roles with little to no training. And there's an expectation then that they know how to be a leader, they need to be a leader, they need to be a coach, and they just don't have the skills. And therefore, that then appears in their performance or lack of performance. It impacts their confidence. And as I talk about, and as I shared in my story, you can put the makeup on, you can put the dress on, you can put the suit on and appear to be confident on the outside, but inside you're crumbling. And actually, because of how you feel, it then impacts how you behave, because those thoughts trigger those emotions that trigger that behavior. And that's why I just thought I've got a great opportunity to play to my strengths, to gain my coaching qualification, and to use the people that I work with as my coaching clients. And therefore it's a win-win for everybody, because the business won, the employees won, and I won because they supported me on that coaching journey.
And also the additional win to that were the other employees whom those leaders that you were coaching were managing and leading, because hopefully the leadership style changed for the better. as a result of all of that as well, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, well, today, you very kindly asked us to talk about leadership behaviours, and share some of your your insights to leadership behaviour. So, what I thought would be a really good place to start is really sort of let's zoom right out. What is leadership behaviour?
Well, I believe that we've all got leadership behaviors inside us, and it's about how do we unlock it. So, again, it's thinking about what do we do day to day? So, we make decisions. Not all of those decisions will be the right decisions, they'll not always be effective decisions, but the decisions that we make, and that is leadership. We will actively listen to people, we will have that curiosity, and through that curiosity we will question to start to peel back the onion layers, as we do in coaching. Well, leaders do that anyway. You'll build rapport, you'll build those relationships, you will have uncomfortable conversations which can feel like challenging conversations. If you don't communicate effectively, then conflict might arise. So as a leader, you have the choice as to how you then deal with that conflict situation, because do we avoid it? Do we go in to compete, or do we compromise and collaborate? And actually, that collaboration is a leadership behavior, because as we know, team, if we write out team, I always like to say that it stands for together everyone achieves more. And I think that's what we do as a leader. So a leader, if you think about all of the great leaders in the world, so I regularly think of Richard Branson, and Richard Branson always talks about his team. So it's his team that want to follow him, or they want to follow him because of his passion, of his enthusiasm, of his vulnerability, of that courageous approach, and being able to put his hand up and say, I didn't always get it right.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because what occurred to me when you were talking about the different leadership sort of behaviors. So I think you mentioned well, I know you did active listening, you said curiosity, you mentioned difficult conversations, and decision making. And if we think about those, they're the sort of the pillars of coaching, aren't they? And so it sounds like what you're saying is that maybe a good leader, sort of embraces those qualities, and knows how to use them.
Absolutely. And if I think about all of the best bosses that I've had, they've all had that emotional intelligence. They've all had that ability to self-reflect and to practice what they preach, and not ask you to do something that they're not prepared to do themselves, versus the poor leaders that I've have had little to no emotional intelligence. They may be very much task focused, and there's nothing wrong in being task focused, but it's remembering that you have to have those people skills to be able to get others to complete the task, because a leader, it's not down to you doing everything. It's about your ability to inspire others to want to follow, to possibly delegate tasks as you empower those to come along that journey with you.
For sure, 100%. And you were talking about great leaders, and as we know, there's lots of research from the CIPD and the ICF and the Association for Coaching. That if you look at employee engagement, which I know there's a lot in your book about this, that people often will leave managers rather than roles or organisations. And so, with that in mind, what would you say then distinguishes a great leader from a good one?
I think what distinguishes that great leader from a good one is where they clearly understand what their core values are and they're driven by those core values, and they have that humility and that vulnerability that they're quite happy to share when they're struggling and when they need support, because it's really, really difficult to ask for support sometimes. But I think the great leaders and where they stand out is they're happy to ask for that support. They're happy to learn from others. And as you mentioned earlier, Sharon, it's about having that ability to be that continuous learner, that courageous learner. And I think that's what the difference is.
For sure. And it can be, I guess, for some, quite lonely as a leader at the top, because yes, you're reaching out and asking for help, but I guess you need to feel that you can open up to certain people, but you might not feel able to open up to others, which is where coaching comes in. Because as a coach, you're there to be able to be that sounding board, to be that safe place in order for them to come and maybe share some additional vulnerabilities and learn a little bit more about themselves. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And certainly from the senior leaders that I work with, and the CEOs of their own companies, I frequently ask them the question, what keeps you awake at 3 o'clock in the morning? Because this is now the space to unload that. And it's amazing. I was with a client yesterday and we was having a strategy session, and I coach him and his business partner. And he went out of the room and the business partner said, can you just ask him what keeps him awake at 3 o'clock in the morning? Because he's downloaded quite a lot to me, but I think he needs this space to download it to you. And it was amazing what came out in that moment and what insight he was able to share with his business partner, because it was the blind spots that she wasn't aware of, and he'd not felt, for whatever reason, that he could share at that moment in time. It may have been, right, well, actually, I don't want you to be kept awake at 3 o'clock with this. So that coaching space allowed him that opportunity to get out what he needed to get out, with no judgment, with no expectation, but actually he left with, because I always ask the question, what have been your takeaways from this session? And he left with, I'm now clear, I've got a plan, I know what my next steps are. Yes, it still might keep me awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you've given me some tools that I can use. And one of those tools is something that I've shared in the blog that Saloni will share afterwards, and that's using the STEER model. And that's, let's just have a thought download. So what are all of your thoughts about this situation? And what are the emotions then that's stirring? And as a result of those emotions, what action or inaction are you taking? And therefore, what's the result of that action or inaction? And we were able to have a great conversation then about, so what needs to change? And what's within your circle of control and influence to change? And he realizes, and this is what I talk about in my book, that change starts when you look at the person in the mirror. And ultimately, you're in control of your own actions or inaction, and therefore you have the ability to change.
I love that, because even choosing not to make a decision is a choice, isn't it? And not making a decision is still a decision in itself. So it's quite interesting when we start to sort of unpick that. You mentioned about blind spots, and last month I interviewed Katie Mason on the Johari window. We were talking about the blind spots. So in your experience, what would you say are some of the common blind spots that perhaps leaders that you've coached have regarding their own behaviours?
So some of the blind spots that they've had is that they don't always realize the good that they produce with a team, because I think as human beings, we naturally zone in on, oh, that didn't go very well. Oh, I'm not a very good leader. And we don't always remember the good stuff that we do. So I always encourage my leaders to go out and get that frequent feedback so that others can shine a light. And one of the exercises that I do, I talk about it in my book and I've shared it in the blog, is the shadow eye cast. Shadow eye cast is you go out to those that are nearest and dearest to you, those that you trust implicitly and will not hold back on the feedback. And you ask them, what is it like to be around me when I'm at my best? And then get all of the good stuff that come to you. And for any of you that have done your DISC profile, if you go back and look at your DISC profile, it should be all written there in your DISC profile, everything that you bring to the party, that you need to continue to bring to the party. But then I also get them to flip it. And as I say to my female leaders, it's time to put your big girl pants on, because you go back and you ask, so what is it like to be around me when I'm not at my best? Because that's then as well where you could get those blind spots. So when I asked my family, they did not hold back, and they described how I behave in that stressful situation, which is confirmed on my DISC profile. And they described my dominant, demanding red dragon in a whirlwind that says, just do it. And they described my D character. But I love my D character, because in a crisis, that dominant dragon needs to come out and just take action. So actually, it was, even though it was a potential blind spot, I was still able to flip it on, okay, so when is that behavior a great behavior to have? But what it was also enabled me, but when is that behavior not great to have? So for me, it wasn't great to have when I can just flip from being spontaneous Tigger in a room and my high eye to dominant dragon, and there's no warning of when it's come. So I've been able to, particularly my children, give them just 5 fingers. And they know that they've got 5 until the dragon comes out. And it's normally because they're pushing my impatience button and I'm on constant repeat. So again, I recognize my behavior. When I'm on constant repeat, that's then when my behavior changes, because it's pushing my buttons. And more than likely it's pushing my core value of respect, that you're not respecting me because you're not listening to me. So having that great self-awareness is just something that has to be developed all of the time, and I continue to develop it now. And I think that very long answer came from a very short question of how do you identify your blind spots from Jahara's window. But by doing that exercise and by linking it back to DISC, that is where the leaders that I work with can see how coaching is helping them connect the dots. And I know that's feedback that I've had is that I have this ability to get leaders to connect the dots. And that is my superpower that I didn't know was my superpower until I went out and asked for that feedback, because that was a blind spot.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if we are doing coaching, we ask for testimonials, we like all the lovely fluffy stuff, and there's a little bit of a fear there, isn't it, about sort of, okay, so who am I at my best and who am I at my worst? And I think what a fantastic opportunity for a sort of a coaching exercise for leaders to go out and do as a result of a coaching conversation that they've had with a leadership coach like yourself, Claire. I mean, so much feedback, because in your lovely example, the personal example that you gave, as you say, there are times when it's appropriate and maybe times when it's not so appropriate. But if we keep it in our blind spot, that sort of the shadow eye cast, so we keep it in the shadow, we just think it's a strength or a superpower. But as we know, any strength that's overused becomes a challenge to ourselves, a challenge to the people around us, and a challenge to us actually being the best that we can be. So I love that. What a fantastic exercise! It's certainly one that I'm going to be taking away, I think, and certainly using. So thank you for that, Claire. And that's really, really helpful. You've talked a lot about self-awareness. So maybe if you don't mind me asking, how do you or how can coaches facilitate that role of self-awareness in developing effective leadership behaviours?
Well, what I do when I'm coaching, as I'm sure a lot of people on this coaching conversation will do, is that you reflect back what you're seeing, feeling, and hearing in that session. So, I sometimes say, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that. Or, were you aware that you've consistently said, and then repeat it back to raise that awareness. And sometimes as well, if I identify beliefs with my clients, I might tap into those beliefs. And again, they may go away and journal on those beliefs. And certainly using that steer model, which is something that my coach introduced me to, is I frequently do thought downloads and just look for what are the patterns. So what are the patterns in my thoughts? What are the patterns in my emotions? And therefore, what are the patterns in my behaviors? And are those behaviors helping or hindering the action that I want to take? And if they're hindering, what do I need to do to change? So I think as coaches, we do self-coach, but I always advocate that every good coach needs a coach, which is why I make that investment in my coach. Because again, coming back to my values, I would never ask somebody to invest in coaching with me if I wasn't prepared to make that investment in myself. So yeah, I do journaling. I don't journal every day. Probably journal once a week. I certainly journal once a week, where I look at what's gone well this week and why has it gone well, what hasn't gone so well, and therefore what needs to change. Because if I continue doing the things that I've always done, I'll always get the same results.
So important, Claire, and I love that you've brought that up about, every coach needs a coach. But the powerful thing for me on what you said there was, how can I ask people to invest in me for me to coach them if I'm not prepared to do the same thing for myself? And that's really powerful, actually. And you've spoken a little bit about journaling, which is a interesting area, because I've had to really lean in. I don't know whether this resonates with you, Claire. I've had to really lean in and learn to love reflective practice. We're a similar profile, so I'm not going to make an assumption, but it's not been easy for me to lean in and love reflective practice. Those of you that have done disc training with me, you will know that I say I do my best reflective practice in the car, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but for me, it's because I'm not distracted by a myriad of other things that are going on. So I know I can reflect, but I've had to really lean into it, and make a conscious sort of decision to do that. So how do you support leaders to use reflection when you're coaching them?
So I'll use that when I'll use SWOT analysis. So again,
Mhm.
I'll get them to think about what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, where is that, I encourage them to go out for feedback. I encourage them to, what else do I encourage them to do? Yeah, journal, but just to come prepared to that coaching session to share what has gone well and what hasn't gone so well. And therefore, what is it that they're bringing to the coaching session this time that they want to work on that will help them move on? And I always ask them at the end of the coaching session, what have been your takeaways from the session? And I do that because as a coach of excellence, I then provide them with their own CPD certificate. So again, that's just encouraging them that, as we know, coaching's not regulated, but if we are part of organizations and we have to prove how many coaching hours we've done, it's a great way of keeping that CPD log. And again, that CPD log is just another way of reflecting. So what have I learned from that experience that I've had today?
Fantastic. And I remember I was working with leadership, one particular leader, was doing some leadership coaching just last year. And one of the reflective exercises that I got her to do was to really think and journal on when she was at in her flow. So when do you notice you're in flow? And that really helped her to sort of hone down on those particular sort of behaviours that were probably hidden strengths or hidden gifts or superpowers of hers as well. Do you do sort of similar exercises?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when we're in flow, we don't always take time to reflect. I think we typically reflect, and again, I don't know whether this is, as humans, we just reflect on when things don't go well. So I think that's really, really vital. And what was interesting today was I opened up my emails and I'd received some feedback, not asked for it, received some feedback, but it was feedback about when I was in flow. And it was from a leader and one of her apprentices, where I'd been interacting with one of her apprentices, and the apprentice had said, it's so refreshing to be in front of somebody that is passionate, enthusiastic, really cares about what she does. And I've learned so much just from Claire alone about the importance of reflective practice, without learning anything from an education perspective. And I was just so warmed by that, because people frequently say, I love your passion, your enthusiasm, your spontaneity, but I don't always see it, because that's almost in my blood. So you're right, but actually when I'm in flow, that's what people see and that's what people buy into. And a little bit like what you'd said with Artie, that is my brand. So ascendo is the Latin for ignite. And when I was at my weekly networking meeting on Friday, we had to describe the next person that we were sat to. And the gentleman that was sat next to me said, I'm going to take Claire rather than the person on my left, because I can describe Claire really well, because she ignites my fire. And he just described my brand beautifully. And that's because I show up consistently every week and talk about me and my business, my clients, how I work with my clients, what results my clients get. And again, that was unasked for feedback, but really valuable feedback, because that gave me great insight into, I clearly do live and breathe my brand every day, even on the days when I don't think I'm at my best. This is all of the good stuff that people say. And I think it's really, really important to hold on to that as a constant reminder when we're maybe not feeling our best, to look at that and remember, when you're in flow, when you're at your best, this is what you bring to the party.
So fantastic. And often at that level of leadership, a lot of the potential leaders that we're coaching may never actually get the opportunity of getting that feedback. So I love that exercise, sort of reflective exercise, and the shadow I cast, which I just think that's a absolutely fantastic one. And the other thing that sort of resonated with me when you've sort of been talking about all of this stuff, and you mentioned about emotional intelligence and decision making and things, is being a value-based leader as well. Really sort of walking our talk where those values are concerned as well. I was wondering, Claire, if you wouldn't mind, obviously anonymously, because I wouldn't want you to sort of put any of your clients' sort of confidentiality sort of on the line. But do you have a story that you could share around how coaching significantly influenced a leader that you worked with's behaviour and sort of the transformational result?
Yeah, so I've been working with a senior leader now for well over a year, and she works in a male dominant environment. It's a global organization, and she came to work with me because she'd hit the glass ceiling and she didn't know how to break through that glass ceiling. So There's been lots of self-awareness raising for her. She's talked a lot about her team. And, you know, she's even talked about, do I leave the organisation? Do I stay within the organisation? Do I go self-employed? So there's lots of conversations that we had. Anyway, the good news is that she's decided to stay with the organisation, and she's moved from the UK industry to the global industry. So she's way outside her comfort zone now, because she's into new territory. But the reason why she was brought into that role is because the CEO has a gap in his leadership team, that he doesn't have somebody with the leadership skills that she's got. And she was able to articulate how she has this natural ability to bring teams along with her. And she went to that interview, was offered a £90,000 salary, and had the confidence to ask for £5,000 more, and got £5,000 more. And she said, it's as a result of coaching that I had the confidence to value my own worth and know what value I can bring to him and the organisation. And, you know, the coaching session that I had with her last week, she's now got a new team that is currently a little bit dysfunctional, and she's used that coaching session and realized that actually I need to go right back to basics with this team, but actually I need to be the leader who I am now, not the leader who I was. And I was able to reflect back to her, but you've got a great opportunity to take this team on a journey with you to become the leader that you want to become. And that was her takeaway from the session of, yeah, I don't need to do anything different other than be the leader that I am today, remember all of the good stuff, and actually become the leader that I want to be in the future.
I love that. Take them on a journey with you to become the leader that you want to be, or that you will be in the future. Lovely future pacing with clients. And it is often the simplest questions that really give our clients clarity, isn't it? It's the same with this client that I mentioned just now about being in flow. And one of the things that she recognized was that, because what she was doing when she was in flow and she was at her best, came so naturally to her. It was like she said, well, everybody does it, don't they? And that's often what can happen with high achievers. It's the assumption that everybody does these things. So I'm not anything different or anything sort of special. And it's lovely to be able to reflect back and raise their self-awareness in all of that. I want to, as we sort of start to move towards our sort of final 10 minutes together, one of the leadership behaviours that you mentioned was resilience. And so I just wondered if you could maybe sort of share some thoughts around maybe potentially how you might approach coaching leaders who might be challenged or struggle a bit with adaptability, but in particular, sort of to build resilience in, let's face it, very fast-paced environments, often that, sort of SME leaders are in, but also in the corporate sector as well.
Yeah, and I think, resilience is something that, we all have to develop all of the time. And there'll be times of the day, of the week, of the month, of the year, where we're not as resilient as what we have been in the past. And again, if I think back to, when I had my crash of confidence, that was probably my lowest resilience point. And I frequently say, if I'd have had a coach at that time to work with me for those 10 weeks where I was putting on a mask, maybe I wouldn't have gone off on long-term sick, because maybe that coaching experience would have created that safe space for me to be vulnerable, for me to talk about all of the challenges that I was facing and not be judged. And I think that's where coaching really, really develops that resilience, because it allows the individual an opportunity to talk out loud about what is going on in the brain. That I always hold my solar plexus because that's where mine sits, that, you know, that is then stirring that emotion, that is then preventing them from being resilient. And I think, you know, the same as when we are resilient and when we are dealing with all of the challenges that we face, I think it's also good to have those conversations about, so what is it then that you're doing that enables you to face that challenge head on? Where is that confidence coming from? And as I frequently say, increased confidence comes from increased competence. So the more we do something and the more we do it well, the more resilient we become. So again, it's about, as coaches, allowing our clients to step out of their comfort zone, knowing that we are that trusted confidant for them. And that, for me, would have certainly built my resilience.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it is creating that psychologically safe space for our clients in order for them to, you know, often we say, you know, that our clients will share with us. If we've created that vulnerability, that, you know, that safe space in order for our clients to be able to share with us, often it's things that they potentially would never say to anyone else. Because actually, as a leader, who do you share that with, you know, unless it is a trusted confidant? So really, just so important. It's just so much there to be able to sort of dig down into. Now,
And I
I
think,
always, sorry, Claire, go on.
I
Sorry.
think just as you've said that, something else popped into my head, that as coaches and our resilience, that's why I have coaching supervision as well, because it may be that as I'm talking to leaders and as I'm unpicking some of their vulnerabilities, it may trigger something in me. And so therefore, where do I go for that safe space to be vulnerable? It may be something that I take to my coach to discuss, but actually it might be more appropriate to take to coaching supervision, because if this is something that frequently happens, then that's more for coaching supervision rather than actually a coaching session, because it may be that I'm not protecting my boundaries. And if I'm not protecting my boundaries, and that then impacts my resilience. So that's certainly something that I've found with leaders. If they don't set those boundaries in place, that then affects their resilience. And again, I just thought it relevant to raise that as we've got coaches in the room, that setting those boundaries is really, really important.
Fantastic. I'm glad you brought that up, Claire, actually, because I hadn't really thought about that. So that was really good. We have 5 minutes left, and I always finish by asking all my guests to share something, sort of as a, you know, as a sort of a learning sort of takeaway or an inspirational message. I mean, I've got loads of takeaways, you know, the importance of that. I love that activity, that the shadow eye cast, you know, what is it like to be around me at my best, and what is it like to be around me when I'm not at my best. I love that as an exercise. But you know, you've shared so much, but is there sort of one potential thing that you could share for coaches to do themselves, or just sort of an inspirational message for people to take away in action?
But I suppose one of my biggest takeaways when I've looked at my own behaviours, and this is an affirmation that my coach shared with me and I frequently use, and I'm leaning into, Sharon, no is a complete sentence.
Oh, I love that. It's so true. And we can't truly say yes until we're comfortable with saying no, right? That's
And
the
again, Claire, don't nod your head when you say no either, because that gives off mixed messages. Just remember, no is a complete sentence. So that is a behaviour that I'm leaning into.
need to make sure the whole message matches.
Yeah.
Claire, where can people find out more about you?
So you can follow me on LinkedIn. And my website is www.ascendocoaching.co.uk. And then my book is available on my website and on Amazon.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Claire. Well deserved. And I know that your book is absolutely brilliant. I can see lots of you are popping in the chat box what you're taking away. As someone who's truly lent in and is learning to love reflection, and I know the importance of it, I would absolutely encourage you just to take the time before you leave in the next 3 minutes to share maybe one thing that you are going to take away from today. Maybe it's just a light bulb moment for you. Maybe you're going to action something as a result. Really important. Love this. Supervision on triggers is coming up. Being in flow is coming up a lot. The shadow I cast, which is great as well. Practicing the blind spots. Lots there. Come in to say she just learned so much from the session, too much to even write down, which is great. Shadows coming up a lot. Very thought-provoking, says Carol, which is wonderful. I really, really have enjoyed our conversation, Claire. And please do make sure that you, even if you're listening on playback, write down something that you are taking away. What is it that's resonated with you from today's discussion? Important for us to reflect on that and what we're going to do about it. Do remember to join me again next month when I will be chatting to the lovely Rashid on being an inclusive coach. So please do make sure that you join me then. But until then, I wish you all well, and I look forward to you joining me next month. But from me, from Claire, Saloni, and the wonderful team here at the Coaching Academy, thank you for joining me today. Have a great rest of your day. And if we don't see you before, we'll see you next month. Take care.
Thank
Bye
you.
for now.